someone come to the microphone, I'll defer to you. So come back to the United States now and take the syndrome that you are describing, and if that is a real trend, cast forward 10 years and tell me how your worst fear plays out.
I think what's going to happen gradually within the American Jewish establishment is that as this older generation of more secular Zionists, again, essentially pass away, these organizations will be taken over by basically by the Orthodox community, because that's really the only bastion of people in their 30s and 40s who I think feel strongly enough to basically come and devote themselves to these organizations. And so that will push the organizations further to the right and more alienate that large majority of more secular American Jews for whom the only Zionism that would be meaningful to them is a critical Zionism. For this younger American Jewish majority, the choice is not between a critical Zionism and a non-critical Zionism. The choice is between a critical Zionism and no Zionism. And I fear that no Zionism is the path that many are going down, or even potentially anti-Zionism. But I think that critical Zionism will be even harder to see reflected in American Jewish organizations. And I think that the American Jewish establishment will be more and more seen not as representative of a consensus in American Jewry, but representative of one right-wing, essentially Republican Party element in American Jewry. And I think that will mean that American support for Israel, as we understand it now, will in fact will be less stable than it is today. And it will probably mean that groups like J Street grow more strongly as a kind of left-wing alternative.
Yeah, we've got someone at the microphone up here. Yes.
President Obama appears to have invested considerable capital in these forthcoming negotiations between Palestine and Israel in September, with an positive outcome expected within a year or so. Just listening to your remarks earlier, what conceivable chance of success of these negotiations?
I don't see much chance of success, frankly. I think the Palestinians are divided, of course, between Hamas and Fatah, and Abbas and Fayyad are very, very weak leaders. And in a way, I think the Obama administration has actually made them weaker, because if you follow the details of the beginning of this negotiation, what Abbas desperately wanted was the continuation of the Israeli settlement freeze that expires in September. He did not want to go to direct negotiations absent a promise that that settlement freeze would be continued. Because remember, Abbas is a very weak leader. He's not a guy, like an like a Palestinian version of Yitzhak Rabin, someone who has a lot of credibility in his own society because he fought and he suffered. He's seen as very weak. And he wanted essentially to show that he could stop Israeli settlement growth as a way to shore up his support in the Palestinian society. He didn't get that. In fact, it seems that the Obama administration, and it's worth people knowing this just for when people say that Barack Obama is so anti-Israel. Not only has he sold more sophisticated military equipment to Israel than any American president, which is a good thing, in my view, by the way, but he also seems to have put intense pressure on Mahmoud Abbas, him and America's allies, to give in on the demand and to go to direct talks without a cessation of Israeli settlement growth, which I think is very unfortunate, actually. One of the reasons that the Oslo process collapsed, one of them was Yasser Arafat's corruption and his unwillingness to do truly brave things. But the other was the massive increase in Israeli settlement growth that took place during the whole negotiating process, which soured a lot of Palestinians on the idea that they were actually benefiting from this. And I think Benjamin Netanyahu, from his point of view, Benjamin Netanyahu spent his whole political career in opposition to a Palestinian state. His arm was twisted by the U.S., and he said he was for it, but he offered two conditions that would have explicitly made the Barak offer, the Barak acceptance of the Clinton parameters at Taba impossible. Remember, the whole point, one of the big points of what Barak did at Taba was he allowed the Palestinians to have a capital in East Jerusalem. Netanyahu has explicitly ruled that out. I don't think Netanyahu has any interest in allowing a Palestinian state. I know why he does it. I mean, he's sincere. He thinks that if there were a Palestinian state, it would be taken over by Hamas, which he sees as being taken over by Iran, and it would be a security threat to the state of Israel. So I think he has no interest in these talks leading to a Palestinian state, and so I am very pessimistic about them.
So how on earth does the cycle get broken?
I think, for one thing, Israel has got to realize that it is better off negotiating with Palestinian leaders who are strong than Palestinian leaders who are weak. It needs Palestinian leaders who are strong enough to force their society to come to incredibly painful realizations. You know, for the Palestinians to accept that all those people in the refugee camps are never going to go back to their homes is a very, very bitter, traumatic pill to swallow. They're going to have a political leadership that's going to have the credibility to make them accept that. Arafat didn't have it. He was not a brave man, and he was also such a deeply corrupt man that he didn't build the credibility in the Palestinian areas, in the Palestinian community that he needed to. This is all a preface by way of saying, I think the United States, although it would create enormous controversy and hostility in the elements of the American Jewish community, has to support the idea of a Palestinian national government, unity government that includes Hamas. I think that what we should ask of Hamas is different. We should not, I would love it if Hamas accepted Israel's right to exist tomorrow and accepted all the previous peace agreements. And parenthetically, I should say that I detest Hamas. I detest Hamas because a close friend of mine was killed in a bus bombing by Hamas, but I also detest Hamas because of what they do to Palestinian women and gay Palestinians and people who try to protest freely. I think it's a terribly unfortunate thing that Hamas has emerged as a movement in Palestinian society. But it's a very powerful, deep-rooted movement. And what I would say to the Hamas is, join a Palestinian unity government. We're not going to ask you to say anything right now, but we want you to empower Abbas as the head of that national unity government to negotiate and to accept that if he reaches a deal, it will be put to a referendum of the Palestinian people. In fact, if you look at what both Ismail Haniyeh and Khaled Mashal have said, they have both said that they would be open to a two-state solution if the Palestinian people accept it in a referendum. And then you have to demand that that Hamas respect a ceasefire, which actually at significant points over the last several years, Hamas has respected ceasefires. Then you might have the beginnings of a Palestinian government whose word, if it actually signed a piece of paper, was really worth something. And also particularly if you brought Marwan Barghouti out of jail to be part of that. So I think that would be the better strategy.
So you're talking about an Israel where the ideological divide is a chasm, but you're also, it sounds to me, saying that one side of that divide is much stronger than the other.
Yes.
And you've also got a situation in the United States where whatever will Barack Obama might be able to muster is at a time when domestically the political situation for him gets more and more complex by the week. With all of the things that he's struggling with, Afghanistan, still Iraq, he's still got to manage that withdrawal from Iraq. He's staring the possibility of a second recession in the face. He's got all kinds of domestic problems, deep-seated unemployment. He very possibly is going to be a first-term president. He's about to cop a big hit in the next round of congressional elections. That is not conducive to a president being brave.
Well, just parenthetically, it's not the topic. I think it is overwhelmingly likely that Barack Obama will be a two-term president. Historically, if you look, presidents who do not have primary challenges almost never lose re-election in the United States. The presidents who lose are always ones who have significant challenges in their own party. Barack Obama will not. The last president who did not have a significant primary challenge who lost was Herbert Hoover in 1932. So Obama will not be challenged in his own party. There's no opposition in his own party, really. And midterm elections, important to remember, are not at all predictors of general elections. Reagan got killed in 82. He had a big re-election victory in 84. Clinton got killed in 94, won 96. So I think Obama, because of the Hispanic vote, the young vote, which will come out in 2012, I think he'll be okay in terms of re-election. I agree, but I agree with you. I think that he will be under pressure not to put so much effort into this. And I think, look, I'm a pessimist. How can anyone not be a pessimist? But I think one has to face. It's always smart when you're dealing with the Middle East to be a pessimist.
It depends what drugs you're on.
But I think we also have to face the consequences of what pessimism means. And I'm not only talking about the morality of a continued endless occupation of the West Bank, which I think is a severe blow to Jewish honor. and to the memory of Jewish oppression. But also, in more practical terms, what is it going to mean? Increasingly amongst the Palestinians, you find that they're moving towards the idea of asking for one secular binational state between the Mediterranean and the Jordan. Increasingly, in fact, one of the really remarkable things that you've actually seen in recent months in Israel is significant figures not only on the Israeli left, but even on the Israeli right, suggesting that there should be a one-state solution. They don't tend to include Gaza, but people like Moshe Arendt, former defenseman, very distinguished people, there was a long, interesting piece in Haaretz about this, have now suggested that they themselves would, in fact, be open to giving the Palestinians in the West Bank the vote over time, or at least they would prefer that to dismantling the settlements. These, if you're a Zionist, are very, very serious challenges to Israel's future existence as a Jewish state. And annexing the West Bank without giving Palestinians there the vote is, in fact, the end of Israeli democracy. So while I think I can understand the pessimism, I think one also has to understand the consequences of essentially giving up on a two-state solution.
We have a question.
A question, a very simple one, because you mentioned Zionism quite a lot, but you actually didn't say if yourself, would you describe yourself as a Zionist or not?
Yes.
I'm not sure actually that a lot of people in the room actually got the meaning of what Zionism really is and what it really means. You spoke of a vibrant democratic Zionism, but there's no such thing as a vibrant democratic Zionism. And I think people should not mistake the difference between being Jewish, which I understand you might be, and support Zionism, because what Zionism is actually, it's an apartheid state. You describe some of the atrocities that the Palestinians have to suffer. And I've got many friends who are Jewish and left-wing activists like me, and they would never describe themselves as Zionists because they condemn Zionism all the way from the start. And one of the reasons why as well is, and I think a lot of
I'm sorry, is this a question or,
Yes,
or a
yes,
statement?
No, I'm commenting.
We'll come to the question.
Just briefly, because actually the US under...
Sorry, hold on for one moment. Can we just, rather than make it a debate, could you just come to the question very quickly,
okay, so
and we'll get to an answer.
Just very simply, would you describe yourself as a Zionist?
Yes.
Because I wouldn't myself. Okay. I condemn Israel all the way.
All right.
Okay, we've got your perspective.
It's not,
what does Zionism mean to you?
Zionism is the idea of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. It does not require Jewish sovereignty over all of the land of Israel, but it requires...
I'm sorry.
No. In fact, you came to a talk about at least one person's conception of how to save liberal Zionism. Zionism, if you read Herzl's writing, if you read Pinsker or Moses Hess, it was always infused with, these were children of the Enlightenment, the 19th century intellectuals who created Zionism. First, what they desperately hoped for was that the countries of Europe would extend the rights of man to Jews. One after another, they became disillusioned because they believed that anti-Semitism was dying out. But they saw through things like the Dreyfus Affair and the pogroms that followed the assassination of Tsar Alexander II in Russia in 1881, that in fact it wasn't dying out, it was reinventing itself. So they decided that they would try to take these liberal, democratic, Enlightenment principles and transplant them to a Jewish state. That's why Herzl's book was not only about the creation of Jewish state, it was about the struggle in the Jewish state to preserve these Enlightenment principles in a condition of power. And that struggle has been fought by every Zionist generation. It's why it was so important to Israel's founders that they write a Declaration of Independence that explicitly promised equality and liberty to all people, not just to Jews, and explicitly said that Arabs within Israel, even though Israel was in the midst of a war for its very survival against Arabs, that they would be given full citizenship, which is not even what many of the Palestinians got, the Palestinian refugees got when they fled to Arab countries in 1948. This has always been a struggle. So I think that although one could have a utopian ideal of a country that had no Jewish character, the history of persecution of Jews throughout the world gives Jews the right to want a Jewish state as a place of potential refuge.